Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode. Here today with Will Richardson of Giant Leap. We don't often talk about funding. It's kind of like there's a lot of that conversation elsewhere, but it felt right. The timing felt right to actually have a conversation about venture funding and funding generally in the context of impact. And as you know on the show, we're obviously keen to understand how this impacts types of founders and ventures who we would normally be talking to who are rolling up to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So welcome, Will. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Vincent. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, and so look, like we always do, I just want to dive straight into the problem. And the challenge we have today is we're probably going to be going down a few rabbit holes with a few different challenges. So I think let's start firstly with the nature of and the state, I guess, of venture funding in the context of impact and perhaps the UN Sustainable Development Goals or a broader kind of parallel to that.
Sure. I guess the starting point for us, Vincent, is that we believe in the power of capital to help create change. We believe in businesses and its immense capacity to change behaviors, to influence outcomes. And we see the wave of conscious capitalism as a really critical tool to be leveraged to complement what governments are doing and what philanthropy is been doing for a long time. And we feel like venture is a great place to start because we need innovation to be able to help to solve some really complex and wicked social environmental problems that we're all facing together, right?
Interesting choice of word, wicked.
And funding businesses that have been around for decades and generations isn't necessarily going to yield the change that we actually need.
Right.
And that's why we think there's a beautiful nexus between impact investing and early stage investing.
Got it. And in so far as the way VC, if you looked at this broadly, and we're going to make generalizations, I understand that. And is there a disconnect at the moment between the traditional VC or the status quo and its relationship to impact-led or at least impact-informed venture investing? Like, well, how does that look for a traditional VC in the market, either here in Australia or even more broadly?
I think as a starting point, ventures, in my opinion, it's really net beneficial to the world, right? As a starting point. It's funding innovation, it's funding change. So that's great. And we co-invest alongside some fantastic VCs in Australia. I think one of the parts of VC that we've consciously decided not to do is like, we're not interested to fund things such as gambling, weapons, tobacco, and so on.
Right.
Like, these are not things that we want to support. Like, there's a negative screening element. And some others do that, right? Like,
sure.
We're looking to invest into things that have a measurable, positive social environmental impact.
Yep. Okay.
And what's really fascinating, Vincent, is that in the past sort of 6 years since Giant Leaps existed, it seems like there's a whole lot of change. We're not attributing that change to us, but there's an incredible wave of change, sure, both in Australia and globally.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously always correlation and causation. So what have been the one or two big levers of change that have kind of created an opportunity for VCs such as yourself and probably VCs more broadly, and we'll talk about that later, to actually start to look at impact as a lens for how they consider investments or what they're investing in or even part of their thesis and rationale generally? Like, what are the one or two big things that you've observed changed in the last 6 or even 10 years that have kind of created the conditions?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. So in the very immediate term, in something that's been like occupying all of our lives, like COVID, the fact that we're all interconnected, right, that we couldn't hide away from it. It didn't matter how wealthy and powerful you were affected. Right. I think that's one thing. Another is intergenerational change. So mindsets, attributes, beliefs, values that are changing across generations, and especially where new generations are coming into intergenerational wealth transfer, new decision makers having greater influence about how resources are allocated, right, is really important as well. The rise of the conscious consumer, I think you can't argue with it. Like businesses like Who Gives a Crap Toilet Paper.
No.
that have just exploded in their demand are just a testament to that.
Another interesting choice of words. You knew I was going to pick you up on that one.
And I think there's something around permission to be courageous in boardrooms.
Interesting.
Conversations that were in the past seen to be woo-woo or were seen to be sub-commercial, were seen to be sort of playground type conversations have completely changed.
Right. Yeah, not serious. I remember we spoke to Jay Fairs a while back, and he runs a studio out in California. And all of the companies that and it's like a studio accelerator type environment. So they're doing work, but also putting money in. And they had basically said, as long as we run everything that these founders are doing through data and we understand that there's science and data that backs this up, nothing's off the table. Like they're massively open-minded to that type of dialogue. Whereas 20 years ago, even if it was true and even if the science backed it up, people would be like, this isn't real. This isn't fundamental traditional business. So why would we see the opportunity for innovation? Interestingly, when I got to the Valley in 2011, I was trying to do fintech related stuff, and fintech wasn't really a word then. And all the VCs that I met with were like, this is a slow moving regulated industry, just not for fintech. I'm like, not for VCs. I'm like, come on, there's a massive opportunity here. I think there's probably some parallels here now where you're starting to see the emergence of this consuming class that say it's important for the product to work and for me to have it to be a great product, but it has to align to my values and it has to align to the change I want to see in the world. And is that kind of a big part of the rationale for your thesis as an early stage fund or as a fund generally?
Yeah, that's a big part. The consumer is really critical, like who the payer is. And our job is to tap into the zeitgeist, right? Like so much of what we do is about timing, and your point around fintech ties into this. Right. It's critical to be able to understand what's moving and how fast things are moving. And I think talent is another sort of really key element here. We're just seeing really, for instance, if you have a look at universities and when they do surveys of soon-to-be leavers, what sort of jobs do they want to go into? 10 years ago, it was investment banking, management consulting and law.
Right.
Now people want to become founders.
Right. Really?
And like really talented people are spilling out of high-paying jobs to go work in companies where they feel there's some sort of mission, there's some sort of purpose, and it makes complete sense. Dan, you mentioned about data sets and what the evidence and the science is telling us, and paying attention to it. Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist, he's done some work with his firm Human Capital, and they've basically mapped companies that have good corporate culture, high employee engagement, are actually outperforming financially.
Right. Have you got a measure of that? It's like 20% or something from memory. I remember having some.
I can't remember the exact details, but he offers a service where he will take proprietary data sets from various groups like hedge funds, run it for them to then influence what sort of investment decisions they make. So that sort of specificity and that sort of acumen that is coming into the everyday investment decisions and just evidence of how things are changing.
And I guess I'm going to be pushing up against what I call traditional VC. And I think that's probably, it's not a Venn diagram with two circles, right? It's clearly a spectrum and a continuum here. But in terms of where you find yourselves versus the people who aren't at your end of the spectrum, do you find you're having to make, trade-offs in some respects around, look, we know we're not going to go into these. These are a hard no, these categories. But also we accept that there's things that may not be as clear or may not be things that we can demand from a founder who we're going to invest in that they would typically be, that would be table stakes in a more traditional VC environment. Like what are the trade-offs for you guys?
I think foundationally, our thesis is that investing for impact outperforms financially. And it ties back into those macro trends that we've already spoken about briefly. So the rise of the conscious consumer, where talent wants to move, but also where investment capital wants to flow. So, for example, you've got a number of family offices that built over generations who are looking to activate their family investment portfolio to mimic the positive change that their foundations have been creating.
Right.
And we're seeing this across all different financial organizations, whether it's a super fund or so on, that there's that desire. And where there's that desire, things are going to look differently. And for us, that's creating the conditions, that's creating the best sort of confluence of events to support impact startups to succeed. Okay. In terms of trade-offs, the way that Giant Leap invests, we're looking for tangible impact from every dollar of revenue that is generated. So as the business scales, the impact scales as well.
Right.
I just think that works for certain types of businesses. It doesn't work for all businesses.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my question. I think if I think back to the kind of textbook / cliche Tom shoes, we sell one pair of shoes and we give a pair away. It's like, all right, well, the connectivity is super easy. It starts to get harder when, the business models are weird and divergent, or there's two-sided marketplaces, or there is a trade-off in, hey, Allbirds are selling a hell of a lot more shoes, but the shoes are made better, but they're also selling a whole lot more of a product. How do we measure the benefit? Do you get involved in that challenge in terms of trying to understand how they measure benefit and the frameworks that you use for that? How does that play out?
Yeah, we do. And just on that Tom shoe example, there are some well-noted unintended consequences, for instance.
What were the consequences? I think I might have come across them, but yeah.
One that I've heard of is that some local shoemakers in the developing countries that are recipients of the shoes from Tom's were put out of business, for instance. So that obviously that was never the intention of the Tom Shoes founders or the company. But yeah, we've invested into some amazing businesses creating incredible innovation, and we try to do our best when we're assessing the impact through it. We've developed called our impact calculator that's available on our website that looks at the beneficiaries, how the impact's created, the longevity and the depth of the impact. We also consider what the unintended consequences will be.
Yeah, right.
But sometimes, we're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
But we're trying to make decisions about what the future will look like.
Sure.
And I think this is the interesting thing with venture capital investing. You can have two funds that have very different views on what the future will be like. You can have two partners within a fund who have very different views and opinions. But that's fantastic. We need that diversity. We need that courage to allocate capital to, make bets on what the future could be. And I think we're just in a fortunate position. We're defiant optimists and we're investing for positive change.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of questions. I'm just going to start, though, with just this question around, I guess, impact and innovation. So the number of kind of companies that I've seen that essentially have taken a copycat model to Tom's, which is, hey, we're going to do this thing and then we'll give one more away. And there's a fatigue that sets in where people are like, cool, but it doesn't feel innovative anymore. It doesn't feel groundbreaking enough. And I think kind of if you take the who gives a crap model and they lifted it completely and said, honestly, we're just going to make plenty of money doing a great product that doesn't do any harm, but we're going to give 50% of this away, you're kind of lifting the bar. When you're trying to evaluate companies who are impact-led, where are the big levers for you? Is it an innovation in the underlying product itself and it's paired with an impact, or is it, hey, they've worked out a way to completely transform the impact that's possible from this category, or just this is a company that's doing really well, but they've got a great purpose-led kind of culture within the business and we think they will outperform as a result? Which of those kind of lenses is what you're looking at?
It's a fantastic question because you understand the nuance of what we're doing, and the answer is both.
Okay.
So if you look at Who Gives a Crap as an example, they use recycled textbooks or bamboo to create their toilet paper. But they've achieved scale.
Right.
They're operating across geographies. They've got stellar growth and there's some real impact that's being created there. But there's enormous amount of impact that's being created by how they operate their business as well.
Right.
And they're leaders, they're pioneers. And the policies that they create, the approach to creating an incredible workplace for their staff will influence others. And it has. And it influences us, for instance, at Giant Leap.
Right.
So that's one type of business that we look for. And they're rare. In a lot of cases, we're looking to invest in some sort of technology. It could be science-driven. It could be data science-driven. I can give you an example of both. As they scale, financially, their impact scales. So on the data science perspective, we invest in a business called Seer Medical. So they're based in Victoria and they're epilepsy diagnostic tool. One of the really big benefits of Seer is you can do it from the safety of your own home, safety and comfort of your home rather than the hospital. And you're far more likely to have an episode at home. Therefore, their tool of diagnosis is more effective in diagnosing people. And they're using proprietary hardware and software they've built to do that. And they've just recently received FDA approval to expand into the US.
Yeah.
We've also invested into a business called Change Foods, which is aiming to create mozzarella and cheddar that looks, smells and tastes like the mozzarella and cheddar that we love, but without the cows, using precision fermentation.
The cows being COWS, not the cows being CALS, calories.
Exactly.
They can still have the calories, but no cows. Okay.
So they're two examples of underpinning technology to create innovative change.
Yeah. And in both of those examples, there's a very specific, probably defensible innovation,
Yes.
but also one that has a high degree of kind of scalability, right? It's just traditional in VC. It's not a service business that's worked out how to make the cows' lives nicer. It's actually an innovation that says we don't need the cows at all anymore. And as a result, if they license it to 1,000 dairies that were otherwise getting an input from a cow, they could produce a different form of cheese. Is that a big part of it as well, which is that with the nature of an innovation, meaning that this thing can get to scale very quickly. It's not necessarily reliant on building out massive sales and distribution, which are very, by their nature, quite capital intensive, and they can be rewarding, but often can be a challenge for a company to get sort of past $1 million a year in annual revenue through to the 10 or 100, which is kind of where VC kind of scale exists.
Yeah, so I think in those two examples, there's a lot of CapEx that goes in to mitigate the technical risk.
Sure.
And there are different opportunities to be able to distribute the product. And as you point out, if they're successful, there's a really strong moat around their business. Mm-hmm. We have invested into companies that are more service-based. Right. So we can talk about Work 180, which is a jobs board to support females to get fantastic jobs with employers that support them in their careers.
Right.
And that's more of a certification for a business that supports females in their careers. Yep. Or Be Applied, which is we're actually using it at the moment to hire our investment manager.
I'm glad you're dog fooding your own investment. Can't wait till you serve me a pizza with the cheese in there. When will that be available, by the way? I'm just curious.
They've made some incredible strides. I can't speak to the exact date when they'll have a product on the shelf, but the yields that they're generating in the lab are outstanding.
Yeah.
But coming back to Be Applied, It's a software as a service that anonymizes candidates for jobs. So instead of having Will Richardson's CV, it basically allows candidates to answer questions that are designed by the hiring team. And it's all anonymized. We don't know the person's name, whether they went to university, what sort of background they have. Right. All we have is the answers to the questions, which then determines who goes through to the interview stage.
And I mean, these examples are incredibly divergent. I think there's a kind of a refrain that you encounter when you go out and raise capital, which is a good VC, I think, or a good partner or associate will at least say, these are our themes, these are our stages. Mm-hmm. But they'll tend to have kind of a couple of layers outside that circle. But we'll take a look if it's here or it's here. Like, where does the circle end for you guys? Like, in terms of ultimately could be any sector. There's obviously a stage definition. Like, how do you think about the boundaries of where you're like, outside of those hard filters you mentioned before, like where does Giant Leap sort of go, this really isn't in our territory, this is not in our wheelhouse?
Yep. So just like in terms of very simple, direct answer to your question, then we can talk about the nuanced element. So stage-wise, it basically seed to Series A is where we play. In terms of themes, sustainable living, health and well-being, and empowering people are our three sub-thematics. Yep. We typically don't like a lot of CapEx-intensive businesses. We typically don't like a lot of technical risk.
Sounds like both of the things. But what do you like?
But if you get it right,
I was going to say,
like you have a true moat, right? Like you've got some real IP.
Yeah.
We see over 1,500 companies a year, and we invest in 5. I hope the audience don't find that too deflating. No. What we're looking for in a lot of ways is outliers. So using Siri as an example, we met a team who are operating in the space of medtech, which is synonymous with
huge budgets,
time spent in labs,
12 years to get approved by someone in a cardigan somewhere.
Exactly. And like capital going in and the scientists shutting the door and just like, stay away for the next 12 years. Let me focus, right? Yep. But what stood out to us is the contrasting execution of the founders.
The way in which they executed, or?
The way in which they executed. So the way in which they thought, their mindset, and the targets they hit that weren't set by us, that were set by themselves.
Right. In a self-reported way too, by the sound of it, where they're like, they were externalizing. It was like a build-in-public type of approach to how they were working through the problem and saying, to get to here in 12 years, it will take 12 years, but in year 1, this needs to happen, and here's what we're doing about that, and everything else is irrelevant until we hit that, and here's where we're up to. Is that?
I think that's, look, I hadn't thought of it like that, but I think that's a really good summation, Vincent. Like, for instance, when we met them, when they were going through an accelerator, health tech accelerator, they had revenues.
Right.
So they had a product.
Doing what?
They built the product. It wasn't just a slide deck.
Right.
They'd built a prototype of the product. They were selling it and they had a Medicare reimbursement and they were basically cash flow break even.
Right. Very unusual for a health or financial services related early stage company.
Exactly right.
And whether impact led or otherwise.
So we were very proud to be the first VC into that business on that cap table. And it's wonderful that Cochlear has invested as well. And these are the types of things that we're looking for. And we rely very heavily on people we trust in the industry across various industries to give their endorsement. And like you can listen to VCs, everyone will say they've got incredible networks. They rely, on people. But what I think is different, Vincent, in our case is many of the champions for various causes in sustainability, environmental change, they're actually our investors.
Right. As in like on the people you've had to go and raise capital from to then make these investments.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting because like in the case of a traditional VC, there is a pool of money that might have come from a family office or a super fund who has said we're looking for an investment return and these people are good managers of money and therefore let's give them the money and get our return. And to your point, it's very transactional in nature by its definition, but you're probably got an upstream, downstream situation where the people upstream are saying we want to invest in these impact-led founders and the founders are saying I want to be getting money from people who are aligned to my values who can help pull some levers. Which is kind of, I guess it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but also a wonderful kind of reality, I guess.
You've nailed it. It's a virtuous circle,
thank you. Okay.
and the fascinating and the most fulfilling and the greatest praise for us is that we have Giant Leap 1 founders who are now Giant Leap 2 investors.
Yeah, it's just like everything you're looking for. Is there a disconnect? Not a disconnect, that's not the right word. Is there traditionally, like if I've taken money from a VC, I have no idea who the LPs, the limited partners are. They're not someone who I have a relationship with. It sounds like you break down that disconnect though, and they're...
Yeah, so we've got an investor event next week in Sydney and our founders are invited and our LPs are invited. I don't know exactly who's going to be in the room. But
or what conversations they'll have. Yeah, we've decided we don't need Giant Leap anymore. We're just going to do the stuff ourselves.
Just intermediate and put it all on the blockchain.
Yeah. I shouldn't laugh. I'm sure that will happen at some point in some form. But that's a fascinating kind of approach because I think to your kind of veiled point before, there is a challenge, I think, a lot where you're taking funding generally, not just from VCs. There is a promise of a whole bunch of other stuff that might be available and it's very hard to execute on that or for that to be a real thing. In terms of how you see the help and leverage that comes down other than the capital for yourselves and the LPs or the people who are funding your fund, like how do they get involved? Like what is the other non-cash benefits that start to come with a Giant Leap investment for the founders you invest in?
Yeah, maybe I'll break it up into sort of 3 core points. And then, so the first is, so the 3 are strategy, operations, and capital. And there's a 4th of community. And the community sort of interweaves into those first 3 points. So strategy, we can take a board seat or an observer seat and we can provide our perspective on these companies. Now, we're, as you pointed out, generalists, not specialists. So the weight/relevance will differ and depend on the company and the industry. Sure. Operationally, we can provide support at different gradients based on the companies and where they're at. Some companies don't need any help from us. Right. Operationally, some need a lot. Like it could be helping with rebuild their cash flow forecasting tool. It could be helping with looking at their jargon, their cost of acquisition to their lifetime value of their customers.
Unit economics, yep.
Yep, and the unit economics. We can help them with introductions, for instance, to customers. I do sales training. I do a lot of sales training with our founders. So one-on-one role plays with them. And we've built out a toolkit basically that every time we onboard a founding team, we run an impact workshop with them, an impact roadmap, which brings in everything, right? Like how to co-design metrics that maps to best practice standards frameworks around SDGs or the impact management project and so on. So we've built like a toolkit that we provide. And then capital-wise, this is really critical, right? Like being there to make follow-on investments into companies is essential, whether it's the actual money to help them extend their runway, whether it's the signaling effect to others. And we also provide introductions to other investors, some of whom are our LPs in our fund. So we've got a number of investors with co-invest rights who we can make introductions to as well. We've done that very successfully in the past. The fourth is community. And the community element, it's a bit like a black box. You just don't know what's going to happen, right?
It's like
it's
that
just
guy in the room for 12 years.
yeah. It's just serendipity, and we just make connections all day, every day.
Yeah.
We're making connections.
I was going to come in to make those 3 or 4, I'm going to call it 4, in terms of like the nature of those specific to the way it works inside a Giant Leap that's probably different by virtue of the fact that you're actively chasing impact-led founders and ventures and doing so with funding from impact-led money. Do those things show up differently from a traditional VC? They sound like they need to be aligned to the values that you've got and the kind of the investment thesis you've got. But do they actually, like you talked about a tool as an example, how might that work differently in your world versus maybe a traditional VC world?
I think it stems back to the why. Like, why is this founder building this business? Like, they're doing their life's work.
Right.
They're taking a lot of risk. There's a lot of trade-offs for them personally. And the reason they're doing it is because they believe there's a mission element. Now, in a lot of cases, we've been able to get access to deals where a lot of others haven't been able to get access because those founders trust us that we're authentic in supporting them on their mission.
Right. Rather than just being a financial investor who's aligned to their values.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, it doesn't mean that every conversation we have with them is easy, right? Doesn't mean that we're always going to agree with them. But I think that it creates this base level of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've got a personal kind of saying where I think everyone's good when they're good. But it's when there's challenges that you get to see the nature of people's character, and you kind of want to be in the trenches with people who you know that they're going to, act with integrity. I think it's probably too broadly used word, but act the right way, for want of a better word, when you have a challenge and when you have dissonance that's happening.
Relationships don't mean anything until they're tested.
Yeah. We need to have an argument, basically, is what you're saying. Hey, I've got you just said something there that was interesting that, I think about someone who's heavily impact-led and purpose-led. You used the words, they're doing their life's work. Is there a mismatch or a potential mismatch between, hey, they're going to do their life's work and it's their life's work? Traditionally a VC is looking for 5 to 7 years to make something and then 7 to 10 to roll it through with a fund. That's just the nature of the way that those funds are set up. How does that align or otherwise with someone's life work?
It's very difficult. There's a whole lot of generalizations in the comments that I'm about to make.
Perfect.
I think there are certain people that can make the jump from being a white page founder through to a CEO of a company that is 50, 100 people plus. Right. And that's not necessarily the same person that can be running a 1,000-person company.
Sure. Sorry, what's a white page founder?
Someone, that's working with a blank sheet.
Okay, cool. So very, very
just starting from scratch.
Okay, cool.
So I think that's one thing to hold. Another is there are different ways for a financial investor like ourselves to realize our investment. It doesn't necessarily need to be a trade sale or an IPO. There are also secondary sales, right? And founders can be doing their life's work, but they don't necessarily need to be in control always. Right. So I think there's a whole bunch of nuances there, but there's, I feel like, natural sort of ebbs and flows where people have a run at something maybe of 7 years, and then things sort of need to change. Like, we just have an idea and we're in sort of like a divergent phase. We go and assemble a team, we build something, we grow something, and we sort of naturally hit a plateau.
Right. As humans generally, like we get to 5 to 7 years, we're like, I kind of need a change. I need to move house or no longer be the CEO, or divest a bit of this or whatever it is.
Yeah. But I think what's really important to us is that founder is genuine and they're creating the genuine DNA in that company that can be sustained.
Right. And just so coming back to that point around kind of aligning with the founders, there's something that's of interest that I've kind of observed happening in companies generally. And there's kind of a measure of this in the long-term stock exchange, I think, which is a concept that's pioneering over in the US. And this idea that you really have to build companies over multi-year periods to really to get them to scale, right? It's kind of compounding 101. Like, your job's done once these things get to a certain level of scale. So when your entry is, but you also think once they're at 100 people or 1,000 people or whatever the other measures are.
Yeah.
Just give me a bit of a framing on that.
I think of us as sprint coaches rather than marathon runners. Right. Our role is to select talent at a very early stage and to support them, to be early believers, support them through a number of different investment rounds. And then there's probably better custodians to work with them on an ongoing basis.
Right.
And we have funds that have long lives, plus. So there's definitely substantial time in there to be able to work through those cycles. And we're already seeing that at the moment where there's maturity and we're able to hand our interests to hand the baton to the next sprint coach.
And is there, or the person, I guess taking up the next part of the overall equation, and is it just kind of as a follow-on to that, is there adequate, similar, like-minded capital in the later stages? Is this where the foundations and these kind of bigger, like what comes into play post-Giant Leap?
Yeah, it's very different over in the US and Europe where it's a much more mature market. And so you have the latest, there are hundreds of impact VCs and impact PE firms.
At this larger end of town.
Just in aggregate with, I think the last time we checked it was between $8 to $10 billion of capital amongst them. Yeah, but there are definitely more groups overseas that are operating at the later stage. But they are starting to come into play in Australia for sure.
Right. Totally unrelated question, but it was kind of linking back to something earlier around the types of companies. And I know this gets used to death, but it's the only way I know how to make the point. Mm-hmm. There's people who go, to California in the 1800s and look for gold. And then there's people who go there to sell them the picks and the shovels, right?
Yep.
And a lot of the opportunities in venture scale type stuff usually relate to someone selling the picks and the shovels. Do you sort of think about this in a similar way as well, where you've kind of got the things that are right at front, might be a brand like Who Gives a Crap, but then you might have someone who has pioneered a new way of creating paper that means that the paper that is used in products like Who Gives a Crap, but also lots of others, is either cheaper or better or more available? Like, do you play on both sides of that equation?
Yeah, one of the businesses that comes to mind that we've invested in is called Evernew. So Evernew take end-of-life clothing waste, put it through their shredder and the machine that they've created, which is effectively the IP that they've created to reduce that clothing into a liquid that looks a bit like honey, that then becomes feedstock for new clothing.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that's right. But then they're not the fashion brand,
right?
But they're enabling others to be able to make clothes that are more sustainable.
I guess the reason why I asked this is that in a couple of the interviews that we've done in the past, and I think specifically about Pratik Joshi, who is running an AI company, and the machine learning models that they're deploying them to massive companies who are processing tons of chemicals. And he basically said, look, if we can get 2 or 3 as customers, we'll probably take about 1 million cars off the road. And we don't have to get 1 million consumers to change the way they consume. We have to get to the large points of influence. And I kind of think that there's probably some similarities here, which is on the innovation side, you need to come at it from a consumer and a visible consumer lens, but there's also large-scale stuff in the background that no one even thinks about or knows about.
Yeah, I think our impact, and I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong, but just the way that our mandate has been designed and our mandate's been, approved by our investors, is that we're very much looking for direct impact.
Right.
So there's some amazing, AI technology or quantum technology that can be used for good or evil, or it can be neutral. And there can be second order consequences and third order consequences.
Yeah.
We're looking for impact that is directly neutral.
Yeah, and innately tied to the nature of the thing. I think the example I think of here is a while ago, if you went to the Atlassian homepage, they had an picture of the Mars rover, right? Okay. And they said, the issue, Atlassian built the software that the team that put the Mars rover on Mars used to handle their bugs and their issues. I'm like, awesome. But also, what else has been done with this show? I guess it's a step too far removed from where you guys play.
It is. We invested in a business called Swoop Aero using drones to deliver vaccines. We, as part of our due diligence and part of our investment, we're very fixed on the CSR policy and what is screened out. Because drones, they can be used for lots of different stuff and stuff that we don't want to support. That's how we seek to mitigate that risk.
I was going to say, being directly involved also works as a filter back the other way to know that it's not directly involved in something else. Yeah, it's fascinating. And then just you quoted a number before, which I kind of want to close on. of 1,500 to 5. Help me understand, like a lot of the investors generally and funding generally, usually they have kind of a dual problem. They have a challenge which they always need more flow, but they also need flow that is of a suitable quality for them to want to invest in it. So they have both a filtering problem and a flow problem. I'm guessing you have a similar challenge, but I'm keen to understand how that challenge shows up and how you guys manage that. Now, the reason why I want to talk to this is the majority of the people we interview on this show, and probably a good chunk of the people who listen, are impact-led founders. And so trying to understand that mechanics from you, I think is going to be super valuable for them and may also result in some efficiencies for you, hopefully.
So on flow, I don't feel I'm going to couch this. I'm possibly going to sound very arrogant.
Not if you laugh before you say it. Well, it depends on the type of laugh, to be fair, but
I feel like we definitely had a challenge with flow 6 years ago.
Wow.
Definitely.
Okay.
When we raised Giant Leap 1, we were seeing 100 deals a year.
Wow.
You know, and those 100 deals in a lot of cases were the deals of small giants, the family office that were involved in founding Giant Leap, as well as Adam Milgram, Pete Cameron, who are venture partners of Giant Leap, and Kylie Charlton. Like a lot of it was their deal flow plus my own personal deal flow. Like Giant Leap didn't have a brand, we didn't have flows.
Right.
After making 27 investments,
being around for 6 years,
very different story,
sure.
Right? Like, so flows we feel are really sufficient. So there's our role in the marketplace, but it's also, Vincent, just a change in the market, right? Like putting impact aside, look at Australia and where we are. We've got so many success stories like Atlassian and Canva and Culture Amp. We've got people spinning out of these businesses because they feel like they're ready for their next thing. You know, they've done their 7-year cycle and they want to be founders or they want to go work in the C-suite. They want to be angel investors. There's a new density of talent. There's density of capital. There's density of knowledge that is resulting in, and graduates from universities, people wanting to jump ship out of the consulting firm. All of this has just bodes so well for flows.
Right.
It's new quantity. There's huge quantity increase, but there's also a quality increase. And then when you look at the stats around impact, more and more of these companies want to be solving a social environmental problem.
Right.
So all of that speaks to the fact that we don't have an issue with flows.
So getting to the filter question, but the related question of filter is, if you could you or would you want to be making more investments, I guess is my question in this. You talk about 5 a year, but there's probably some good reasons to do 5 a year other than just let's choose the best 5.
Filtering, we have worked so hard as a team over the years to build an iterative process to handle the volume. And I have to pay homage to Hannah, who's our analyst, who's at the front line, Charlie, who was there before her, Rachel before Charlie, and others before them, like all the way back to me when I was using an Excel spreadsheet that the team...
It's the world over, by the way.
couldn't handle. They just thought it was appalling. But, you've got to start somewhere with that blank sheet of paper. So we've developed a pretty strong rubric that enables us to log every single deal and respond to every single company. Sometimes we make mistakes, but, like Oregon's probably 99.5%. We're responding to everyone on time, respectfully.
Yeah.
The reason why that number is low and sort of makes sense to be low, like the venture maths says that we need to invest in, sort of around 23 companies for a fund of our size.
Right.
So 5 a year over 4 years. 6,000 that we'll see or more. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
That's the nature of it.
I think one of the other nuances there is a lot of these founders we've known, like Eric from Suit, we've known for 4 years. Simon Griffiths and I've known each other for a decade. Right. And why is that important? It's the same reason why it's important when investors are looking to invest into Giant Leap. A number of these investors have known us for 4 to 10 years, right? Trying to observe whether we're trustworthy. They're trying to observe how we deal with problems. What matters is what people say about us when we're not in the room.
I was going to say what matters about you is that, but also when you say you're going to do something, you do it. I was just going to kind of reframe that from a founder perspective. I think founders often misunderstand or misread the importance of kind of continuity and time at bat. And it's fine for something to take 5 years before it makes sense for it to take on capital, especially if you've got continuity of the strategy and the story And in a lot of cases, we're not ready to do that thing. For a lot of founders, I think they miss an opportunity in being able to build a relationship super early in a very efficient and tactful and respectful way of other people's time, not just investors, but other people generally. And then someone turns around 7 years later and says, I've known them for 7 years. Actually, when they reached out to you 7 years ago, it wasn't that you met them at a party, you met them in a work context, and it became ultimately a work-based relationship that then got steeped in 7 years worth of, the right type of activities predating an ultimate investment. Is that kind of how that plays out? I'm guessing it wasn't all social.
Yeah, Geordie from Great Rap. I was introduced to him by another founder, and that was when he hadn't even founded Great Rap with Julia, his wife.
Yeah.
I don't think it really matters whether it's social or professional. We're all humans, and I just think time is there's no substitute for it.
Yeah. And a lot of these things, impact or otherwise, actually take a huge amount of time. Using time as a metaphor or time as a thing, I think we'll call time. Cool. Mindful of everyone else's time as well. But thank you so much for coming on the show. We haven't had any kind of investment-related conversation on the show in 3 years. So brave territory for us to go into because I wanted to stay true to our mission. But I think so much of we covered today and what you're talking about was really useful and valuable. And I'm really keen to see how you guys play out in the next few years. So we'll probably do a circle back and a check-in at some point as well. But thank you again for being on the show today.
For sure. I feel incredibly flattered. I didn't know that. So thank you so much for having us. It's been a delight to talk to you, Vincent. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.